Hello, everybody. It is your host, KG82 Live, aka the Bald Brawlers. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I am here with my co host, as always, Mr. Earlbeck. Blondie, how was Friendsgiving with the whole crew and everybody back in Carrolltown?
It was good. There's a few people on my shit list. Sap, number one, part of the agreement of losing the Sacco was he had to say grace at Friendsgiving. He, of course, did not. And number two was Ross Clucky because it is his duty at all times to say grace at Friendsgiving, and he again failed me and put me on the spot. So I gave probably a C minus effort on grace, but it was my best effort.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes your best effort is the only effort that we can give. And you know what? Ross will be in town come next year. And so all things will work out. And I'm sure you did just fine. I was sad to miss it, but down in Texas, hanging out with shorts and throwing a tennis ball around with the dogs, I mean, I'm not going to complain too much about that. But with that in mind, I know we have the delayed pod out. So we're going to kind of preface this whole pod on we're not taking Thursday's game results that kind of already happened. I mean, we'll obviously potentially touch on it briefly, but power rankings, miscellaneous stuff like that, kind of really not building into the Thursday games. But outside of that, kind of just dive into last week. Some of the matchups. Zach, did you have one that you kind of wanted to highlight for the people?
So you're going to talk about your and Kyler's matchup. And before you start, I have to say thank you for reminding me of a rule that I use in fantasy football every year. And I have considered a couple times breaking this rule. Do not trade with that week's opponent. Watching Jonathan Taylor, I know you won, and I know Eckler and Deontay Johnson played well, but trading away Jonathan Taylor to your opponent and then watching him drop a 50 burger was laugh out loud hilarious. So thank you. And actually, Devontae Adams with a 27-point silver medal against Sap. So thank you guys for reminding me of a very important rule in fantasy football. I will not trade with my opponent that week for that reason exactly.
I know you pretty much hit the nail on the head. And I guess obviously I looked at it, I was like, oh wow, okay, he's having a really good first half. Oh wow, really good. Oh, okay, he's dropping a freaking 50 burger on me. This is fun. This is fun. Calm the fuck down, Jonathan. And I obviously had seller's remorse at the
laugh out
point.
loud hilarious. Yeah, I can't imagine. It was so funny.
I had seller's remorse. I was like, God, that would have knocked me in the most points last week and everything. But as we kind of referenced, like everyone always like, oh, I concede defeat. I was like, no, what, screw it. I'm gonna be trusting Eckler and Deontay. And I think the first four touchdowns of the Sunday night game were all by my players. And so everything ended up breaking out right for me. And yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the rare instances, like, even if we didn't do the trade, I would have ended up winning. But I think both sides actually came out happy. Luddy got the experience of having the number one overall player and seeing that upside for his team that he didn't necessarily have. And then I got more well-rounded efforts. So it was one of the rare instances, I think, of a win-win for both of our teams, I think.
I don't think Kyler thought of it as a win-win. I know he got Jonathan Taylor, so he's going to be fine. But I think last week was like an absolute rips his soul out occasion. I thought it was one of the funniest things I've seen all year. I couldn't. The fact that there was 50. So it was funny either way. Either you had to like lose to Jonathan Taylor, or then it comes full circle on Sunday and Kyler has to lose to Eckler and Deontay Johnson. So the whole thing was funny. So thank you for reminding me. I'll never trade to my opponent. That was fantastic.
I know, it was something else. And you know what? I tend to be like Mr. Sunday and Monday night when everyone always concedes defeat like you did against me. I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to bury him in the grave. So went with that same rationale for Kyler. And I'm a little worried I'm going to have to do that again this week in my matchup with two guys playing on Sunday night. But that's what makes it fun. So we'll just roll with it. But I think that was – go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the other matchup that stood out to me was Sap and Jared. And I know it was the toilet bowl and it lived up to expectations in that regard. I think that ended up being a 280 pointers. But I mean, if you're Sap, what in an ideal situation. You're like neck and neck with Jared. Devontae Adams just goes off on you. Your season is basically hanging in the balance. And who do you have left on Monday night? Tom fucking Brady. It's like, I mean, Tom Brady, it wasn't pretty, but puts together enough to basically salvage Sap's season and sneak him through. Because I mean, if he loses that, he's 4-7 with the uphill climb of uphill climbs to come back. But now he's 5-6. He's fucking right back in the mix, all thanks to Tom Brady. I mean, that's storybook stuff right there. That's as good as it gets.
I know. Yeah. I mean, it's just only fitting that Sap has Tom Brady. I mean, death, taxes, and Tom Brady are the 3 guarantees of life. Too bad Steven Gostkowski isn't in the league, or of course Sap would have him as a kicker. But you know what? That's one of the beautiful things. And with Sap's win, it also made the league in general a lot more fun because we now have, I believe, a 5-way tie for the last 2 playoff spots. Is it?
Yep,
And
that's right.
that's just causing for complete chaos. Like, it's almost, obviously I'm not locked and loaded, but it's a high chance we're going to have some tiebreakers going in where that total points scored could be the tiebreaker, where Sap obviously isn't the greatest advantage at, but you know what? If he has a better record than any of these teams, if he goes 2-1 or sweeps 3-0, he's in the playoffs for all the crap that we've given him. And so kudos to his team, and just finds ways to win.
And chaos is exactly what we've got. I mean, if you could draw up a perfect fantasy football scenario going into week 12, is like basically like yourself locked into the playoffs. Because I think me and you I think we're both locked in almost, I think.
Pretty close to it. I mean, I think the worst case scenario for us, I think you're 100% locked in with 8 wins. Me, I think I'm not 100% with my points scored and all that stuff. It seems highly likely that I'm probably going to be in.
Yeah. So a 99%. So, okay. So here it is. We are in the playoffs, and then the rest of it is an absolute fucking just a mess. Pure chaos. It's going to be freaking awesome watching down the stretch. That's exactly what if I could have drawn it up, this is exactly what I wanted, where I'm safe and everybody else is fucking sweating bullets right now. That is just like chef's kiss, because the Yarsky, this is as tight as it's ever been, right? I mean, there's no way we've ever had a year where it's this tight.
I don't think there has been. I mean, we have the 5 teams all tied for the last playoff spot with 3 games to go. And Kyler, he's only 1 game clear of that hurdle. So if he loses this week, and there's already guaranteed 2 teams to join him because there's 4 matchups of the 5 and 6 teams. I mean, it's potentially looks like a 6-way race on who's going to get those last 2 playoff spots, with Kyler with the half-game lead, which is absolutely huge. So, like you said, me and you are sitting pretty. We're both battling for buys and all that kind of stuff, and we're looking pretty good. I mean, that's what we love right now. Let all the chaos happen between us, below us, and we'll just enjoy the view from up here.
That's exactly it. I think watching these next couple of weeks is going to be freaking hilarious. And I think next week I'm going to make a note. Built is always the schedule guy. He's always like, okay, this person needs to win this month. So maybe next week will be schedule week, because we'll have 2 weeks left. Plus we should have a good idea of tiebreakers and stuff. So we might have to I'll make a note. We've got to have schedule guy give me some topics of conversation for next week. But it's gonna be fucking awesome. That's all I gotta say.
I love it. And with schedule, we got schedule week next week. I like that because Bill's always proactive on that stuff. But with that in mind, we also have this week the Zach Earlbeck special project. So you asked me about it. It's like, hey, do you want me to send this to you? I'm like, no, I want you to share your screen. So I'm not going to be completely blind. So I'm going into this fresh with everyone else. So you want to kind of set the stage and then lead it off for us, my man?
Yeah, I wanted to take, every time you do the pod, you're like, okay, what can I do to take it like one step higher? So this was my idea. And what it is, it's a crossover of roast. Remember we used to do Roast 'em Wednesdays?
Oh, yes.
And the power rankings. So I'm going to share my screen here. And you let me know if you can see that.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So my little special project that I've been working on is this week's power rankings. So I also started presented by question. We have a potential sponsor in the wings. who's willing to pay top dollar. But what kind of businessmen would we be if we didn't put it out to the pod and take the best offer? So this is everybody's warning that if you want to sponsor next week's power rankings, I'm a pretty cheap date. So slide in those DMs and let me know. Okay, with that, let's dive into the power rankings here, and they're gonna start as they've always started, with Jared at number 10 at the bottom of the standings for what is the 10th week in a row, which is insane. So, I mean, what else is there to say about about Tua Tagovailoa? Jared totally walked through another game last week. He had Sap, couldn't get it done. But what he needs to do is put on that hard hat and chase that third win to get ready for the Sacco playoffs. People honestly should be a little scared of Jared because basically for the next 3 weeks, his only goal is going to be to ruin people's playoff chances. And he's going to need that positive momentum going into the Sacco because he is on deck for what would be his third Sacco title, which is not an honor that anybody wants.
That last picture that you had just before this, I actually thought of the 3 instead of the third win. Is he now shooting for his third Sacco? That's immediately my thought.
Yep. This is if Jared gets his third Sacco, we might have to print this poster out for Jared.
I think that's his new team picture if he loses this year. But hey, you know what? Just get your win this year, and you're not gonna have to worry about it. So Jared in the 10th hole, that's a no-brainer.
It only takes one win for Jared in week 16 and 17. So like you said, at 10, no question. He played in the toilet bowl last week. So we've got Jared, or lost the toilet bowl last week. Now, who do we have in the 9 spot? I've got the winner of the toilet bowl last week, Mr. Sapper, 5-6 after 5 straight losses, averaging 82 points over that stretch. People were saying Sap's team is trash. They were saying, here comes the Sacco playoffs again. Where's he going to put the trophy this year? But like I said earlier, it came down to Monday night. He needed 13.6 points from his boy TB12, and that man came through. Sap's champion got him right back in the thick of the playoff race, and no pun intended with that thick comment. He's still got an uphill battle. He's got Schultes, Tino, and then Pooty on deck with the remaining schedule. And to be honest, there's just not enough points scored lately to climb the rankings. But don't count Sapper out of the playoffs just yet. With that win last week, he's right back in it. And I mean, look at the hammer in that guy's mouth. That's a man who's hungry for the playoffs.
That is a guy who knows how to win in December. I mean, he is winter ready, and he is freaking ready to go. So, I mean, that picture alone makes me want to put him in the 8 hole, but respect to you for leaving him in at 9.
I also wanted to say, not using any of the naked pictures of Sap in the slideshow took absolute fortitude on my part. So credit to me.
Yeah, I was already wondering where his naked butt picture of him staring at the river or something was. So kudos to you 100%.
I have so many of Sap's naked ass in my phone. So now we're going to move on to the 8 spot. For the 3rd week in a row, I've got Schultes in that 8 hole. Flashback to week 8. Schultes flies up the ranking to the 4 spot and inside the playoffs for the first time all year. That man was living large. Just look at this. And then he follows that up with 3 straight losses and people start writing him off. But last week, bam, he drops 140 points on Built. Suck it, Tino. But he runs into Sap this week, who's back in the mix. Schultes has no Clyde, no Kamara, and no D-Hop. So hanging on by a thread, and my prediction is that Schultes will be on the outside looking in at the end of the regular season.
Yeah. I had nothing to say on that. That was a pretty good one. I like the one where he was the hood over him. It looked like a freaking Darth Maul or some shit. I don't even know. Looked like a fucking evil Jedi, but that was pretty damn good. Is that thing of I thought that was a thing of liquor between his legs or something. I couldn't even tell. But
I don't remember. I feel like somebody sent me that picture, like I think he's in Europe or something. When they were over there in Europe or whatever, I think he was on a train or something. So
that's good.
Schultes was one of the ones that made me laugh the most. I think him in the bed with the chicks, and yeah, to me, Schultes's was funny.
All
So
right,
that's
and now
who
we got the 8-hole. Who's the last person you got on the outside looking in?
I've got Mr. Snacks at 5 and 6 in the 7 spot. Now, I'm not sure if Axe was painting Morgan's toes early in the season or what, but starting out 1 and 4 put him in a huge hole early. Then, we say, Axe, on the pod, you got to see this coming. That's the Sacco coming right at you unless you wake up and turn this around. So he rips off 4 wins in a row and was right back in the mix, but he stumbled the last 2 weeks versus me and Ross only averaging 81 points. So with those last 2 weeks, coupled with the tough schedule of Built, Pooty, and Luddy, Axe's season is on absolute life support. Pooty, Curb, what do you think of the bottom 4?
I think it's just so hard. I think the bottom 2 are kind of set in stone with just total points scored. Schultes, I think his team is good, but with all the injuries you kind of referenced, and he's just going through so much right now, it's hard for him to find a win. So I know it's not really an elimination game, but I think the Sap Schultes matchup, just given their current state of their teams, is an elimination game this week. And Sap, despite his team being down, his team has the advantage because Schultes' team is so battered. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And the 7-hole having Axe, it's just looking at all the 5 and 6 teams and who do you like the least? They're all high quality teams, but I happen to like Axe's the least, so I think he goes in the 7-hole.
And that's exactly where I was at. I agree. Like Jared, Sap, Schultes in those 10, 9, 8 spots for me were pretty rock solid. Like I like Schultes' team, he just can't stay healthy. And then it was between Built, Pooty, Axe, which team I think is gonna miss the playoffs. I haven't done again all those scenarios and the head-to-heads. I maybe should have looked at that a little bit, but I've got Axe's team on the outside looking in, basically just because of that slow start. So.
All right, so hey, he's in the last spot looking in, but who do we got here in the 6-hole? Is it one of those other 5 and 6 teams that you're referencing, or is Kyler have a little bit of a drop after losing to me last week?
So just sneaking into the playoffs this week, I've got Mr. Alpha. Pooty started the year out with some well-documented bad beats and a 2-5 record with the most points again. Again, shocking the world last year and winning the ship, even though it was a COVID year. But I think with that start that he had, everyone just assumed he was sliding right back into the Sacco playoffs like we had seen in all those years prior. But Pooty just keeps rowing the boat. He rights the ship and rips off 3 wins in a row. Now he had a good showing. Go ahead.
Looks like he's about to come right now. It looks like that's his vinegar strokes or something.
Exactly, because he just ripped off 3 wins in a row. Now he did lose last week, but it was a good showing on his Bipocalypse, and now he heads into matchups with Ross, Axman, and Sap to close out the year. So huge matchups on deck. So Pooty's had to block out the haters. Kirby's telling him to sell out and give up on the season. He's had tons of points against, but I'm predicting that he's going to overcome all of that and make the playoffs with what I view as a pretty good team.
May the record show I never once told Pooty to sell out on his team because I thought it was good. I said Jared to sell out his team because his team stunk and should focus on the Sacco playoffs. I never once said that about Pooty's team, but continue with the 5-hole.
All right, in the 5 spot, I've got Mr. Luddy. Last week he was 6-3, trades for the number 1 player in fantasy, and then watches him drop an early 50 burger all over Kirby's chest. Look at that guy. That's what he was doing at about 3:00 on Sunday yesterday, last week. He was living the high life. And then, oh no. Eckler, Deontay Johnson ripped Luddy's heart out on Sunday night and hand him a tough L. But That's the smile right there of a guy who's still 6-5, still controls his own destiny, and still has the best fantasy player on the planet right now. So I've got Luddy in the 5 spot.
I think that's right about where I'd have him. I had him tough between the 5 and 6 slot, where I think I might like Pootie's team more, but having that 1-game lead with the playoffs, I think that might be the tiebreaker. So I think I agree with that overall.
Okay, and then in the 4 hole, kind of the teams that are missing out on that upper echelon, I've got Mr. Valentino, which is down 2 spots from last week. If you remember, he was at the 2 hole last week. So this is down 2 spots, which is a big drop at the top. So after a hot start, Phil's lost 3 of his last 4 and has put his team in absolute jeopardy. Now, I'm not sure what's been going on lately. I'm not sure if Prebeck's got Tino focused on sipping cold ones and chasing barely legals or what's going on over there. But despite the recent schneid, the schedule sets up pretty nicely. He's got Axe, Sap, and then Curb in that very last week. And I still really like his team with the horses in the running back stable. So my prediction is we will see Valentino back in the Yarski playoffs. Curb, what do you think of that middle 3 there?
I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I kind of just looked up one thing because I was kind of curious. We know, I think CMC's been back for 2 weeks for Bill's team. And I just kind of looked overall Bill's performances. Like, I know he's one of the 2 teams that doesn't have most points scored. And he hasn't actually eclipsed 109 points in the last 5 weeks, which is surprisingly a low bar for someone who's got all the horses that he does. And I know he hasn't had CMC for 2 weeks, but it's still a surprisingly low number given some of the horses that he has. And I think some of that's contributed to the wide receivers. He has good wide receivers, but they go off on different weeks. They're not as consistent as other guys. So it'll be intriguing just to see how his team pans out in the long run. And I kind of already touched base on Luddy and Pootie's team. So no problem, I think, with those 4 through 6 spots.
Yeah, and Bill's team too, like, he has had a few, I think he kind of ran into his bye weeks, and then he had Amari Cooper out, Antonio Brown gets hurt. That, he was trying to plug, Miles Sanders gets hurt. He's trying to find somebody to plug into that flex spot and just, I don't think could find the right combination with guys on bye. So it's been a tough couple weeks for Bill. Again, I think those running back horses were part of the reason he is where he is. But yeah, he has not performed up to par lately. So Bill's got to dial it back in if he wants to hold on to that 4 spot and make the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. But between his top 2 running backs, he's got the top pair of running backs in the league. So, I mean, he's sitting plenty good, easily deserving of the 4 spot.
So now we move into that upper echelon. I've got the big climber of the week, up 3 spots, Mr. Kirby KG for TN at 7-4. Curb had to be feeling absolute sick watching Jonathan Taylor go bananas last week all over him. But to everyone's surprise, the newly acquired Eckler and Deontay Johnson return a knockout blow on Sunday night to snatch a victory from Luddy. Now, I'm sure Kirby feels like an idiot for trading away the best player in fantasy, but we must remember that he got some superstars in return and is back in the upper echelon of the league after 2 straight wins and heading into a matchup with Jared, who has no Mahomes this week. So that's who I've got in the 3 hole, Mr. Curb.
Hey, man, I love that picture of the shooting star. 1 spot lower than where I thought I would be, not going to lie, but hey, we can talk about that a little later. Let's dive into Mr. Roscoe Dash at number 2, I'm assuming.
Yes, and I want to remind you, this was prior to the Thursday game. I think if I would have known that, and we don't, I mean, what I'm hearing is that DeAndre Swift is sort of day-to-day, but nothing is worse than when your RB1 goes out of the game like halfway through the first half or something. I mean, that's usually a tough one to come back from. We don't know the severity of it, so we'll see. I think that probably would have been enough to flip you 2, but as of right now, I've got Mr. Ross in the 2 spot, up 1 spot after back-to-back victories. You just know he was laughing after Axman's head-scratching bulletin board material comments made on the pod last week. And this is a public service announcement to everyone. You got to be careful what you say on here because the rest of the league is absolutely listening. He took care of Axman laughably easy and has maintained his status as an upper echelon team despite trading away Jonathan Taylor and having his superstar quarterback Kyler Murray injured. It looks like in the Busch Light division, Ross and I are going to have a huge game week 14 that could go a long way in determining the Busch Light bye, because right now he has the head-to-head. He won the first head-to-head matchup, so he has the tiebreaker right now. While some, prior to the DeAndre Swift, Ross probably thought he was a number one team in the league, but I have him settling at the number 2 spot in this week's Yarski Power Rankings.
Yep, I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
and
I
think an interesting thought experiment would just be how good would Ross's team be if he had the Jonathan Taylor still on his team to go with Cordero Patterson and DeAndre Swift. So his team would be a juggernaut, but obviously it's easy to say that in hindsight as opposed to knowing what we know now. Because the first 3 weeks, he wasn't getting any touchdowns. So that's
right
when we happened to trade for him. So 2020 is obviously, you can never explain it, but Ross's team would be an absolute juggernaut if he held on to JT.
Yes, Ross would be probably, he would have more than 7 wins, I think, if he had Jonathan Taylor. So at the top spot for the 3rd week in a row, I have Old Earl at the top of the power rankings. Since I was a little boy, all I wanted to do in life was win a Yarski championship belt. But every year ends the same way: a loss, tears, and a wife, as you can see, who laughs at me for being such a loser. Now, this year, I've assembled what I feel like is a pretty solid team. So my goal is to keep my head down, continue to chase those W's in pursuit of that elusive championship belt. Curb, what do you think of the top 3?
I mean, I think you're obviously the clear number 1. You got overall your team depth is just very solid between having the solid 3 running backs and the high value handcuffs for all 3 if one were to go down. So that's a huge benefit for your team. I think I would just flip me and Ross. I know he beat me head to head, but since Henry has gone down, I think the past 3 weeks, I think my team still has the most total points. And so I guess it's really just semantics in terms of who 2 and 3. It's kind of irrelevant. But overall, I think it's going to be very interesting at the top. Right now, I know we'll touch more on it next week, but my team, I think, is looking pretty solid for the bye. If I go 1 and 2, I'm guaranteed at least a tiebreaker of it. And already having head-to-head wins for Schultes and Bilt and a 100-point lead in total points, I think I have the inside track. And so that matchup, I think the last week of the regular season between you and Ross is going to be a great matchup for the 2 seed and potentially a rematch down the road. The loser's probably destined for the 3 seed. So it could be an interesting matchup and trying to secure that bye. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. So what do you think of the special project? That was
I thought it was dang good. It was I thought it was solely going to be roasting pictures of everybody, but I like how you kind of told a mini story within it all. So I enjoyed that a lot. I think my favorite pictures was Schultes when he had the hood over his head on the subway, and then Jared with the number 3 looking all battered and injured, because obviously that's just going to be hilarious for next year. But very well done. And yeah, overall, it's going to be interesting to see what these last 3 weeks kind of unfold and kind of go from there. I'm excited, my man.
Yeah, I just think the middle of is just so tight, and we're, it's like we're splitting hairs on so many teams. So I think it's gonna be awesome down the stretch. So I'm kind of pumped for that.
I know, amen to that. But with that in mind, I think the only thing we got left for our people before they let them go post Thanksgiving and watch some football here as next week's matchups. I know we kind of referenced 2 big matchups between 5 and 6 teams, and then also Pootie's team is another one battling. So which one do you kind of got your eye on for next week?
So one of my questions was, they added the games this year, an extra game this year. So it changes how we used to look at it. It used to be 7 wins. If you were 7 and 6, then you would sneak into the playoffs about every year. You never missed it with 7 wins. Now, I was curious if like because Built and Axe are playing this week. They're both 5-6, and Sap and Schultes are playing this week. They're both 5-6. So I was curious if 7 losses would be enough to eliminate you. So basically, these 2 games this week would be elimination games. But from what we don't think, because everything's so tight, that these would not be elimination games. So I was thinking that those would be huge, huge games. I mean, if you were playing for your playoff life already, that would be huge. But I think for me, and this is just totally selfishly, I've got the Ross and Pooty matchup circled. I don't think Pooty will have a bigger fan in the league than me this week. So if I win and Ross loses, I have the absolute inside track on the bye. So that's the one I'm focused on. Obviously, DeAndre Swift went down in the Thursday night game or Thursday day game. He got 2 touchdowns from Dawson Knox, which helped big time. But obviously, you lose your RB1 halfway through the first half. You're gonna be a little tight. So I was just checking to see if anybody plays Monday night in that game. Pooty does have DK Metcalf going Monday, so it might be another one of those that comes down to DK Metcalf on Monday night. So that's who I'm watching. What's Fantasy Pro saying here?
So yeah, right now they have Pooty as one of the top 2, pretty much one of the top 2 teams this week. So we kind of referenced last week. He had the bipocalypse, but now I believe the rest of the season his team is full strength, which showcases here where number 1 wide receiver, flex, a top defense and kicker, and his tight end really is his only weak spot. But outside of that, he's pretty strong all throughout his whole team with elite talent almost across the board. So they love Pootie's team, and for Ross's team, not quite as strong, but still a pretty strong team overall. But I think Ross is just hurting with some of the running back injuries. They don't know if Cordell Patterson's for sure playing, which could be interesting. And obviously having Kyler Murray on bye hurts Ross's team this week. So even though Ross's team is high in the power rankings, he's hit with byes and injuries this week. So it's going to be tough for him to hold off Pootie's team, which we've liked all year, and it's starting to show these last few weeks. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So that's the matchup I'm gonna definitely be watching. What about you, Curb? You got one you're highlighting?
Yeah, I think there was 2 real matchups that I kind of looked at. You kind of referenced the 5-6 matchups that are maybe elimination games. Haven't dove into the numbers, but if you lose this week and win out, I think 7-7 has you a chance at a tiebreaker scenario. But the matchup I'm looking at, just because I perceive them as 2 of the better teams compared to the other 5-6 matchup, is Built and Josh. So Built's team, obviously, we love with the running backs, and we both kind of agree if Built was to make the playoffs, we don't want to see his team because his running backs typically win championships in our league, and he's got 2 of the top 5 running backs. So if he loses and somehow is at 5-7 with 2 weeks to go and still has to play myself, I mean, I'm going to be circling that game trying to eliminate him to the best of my ability. So yeah, obviously in hindsight, Built got a little lucky with Darren Waller getting hurt in the first half, and so he's got the projection advantage over Josh with both quarterbacks for both teams having a good day. But it'll be very interesting to see what kind of comes to a head from this matchup and see what goes on. So I know for Fantasy Pros, they really liked Built's team this week, obviously for very good reason. And Josh's team, they worry a little bit about that wide receiver position with CD being out for COVID and Josh's defense just being a little bit weak. So we'll see what kind of happens. He's starting Jacksonville versus Atlanta, which could be great, but could be awful. It's hard to really know.
Yeah, that has a recipe to be either like a genius move or an idiot move. You won't know until after the game. I think it's going to be fun. I think because Built has all noon o'clock left, and then Axe is going to have Nick Chubb on the Sunday night game against Baltimore that we're going to get a watch to see if he does enough to snatch another victory from Built. So yeah, I think both of those are going to be great games. Built, some of those teams at 5-6, I know it's not quite an elimination game, but you have to feel like it's pretty darn close. So those teams are going to be fighting for wins. They need every point they can get.
It's one thing to lose and it won't necessarily eliminate you, but 2 of the 5-6 teams are guaranteed a win. So all of a sudden you're a game back with 2 games to go, and you have no more room for error. You need to win your last 2 weeks or it's over. So you have
Exactly.
potentially 1 loss left on your schedule. You don't want to use that up in 3 weeks. You don't want to use that here. So very interested to see how these matchups go, and hopefully they'll get a little smack talk between Built and Axe. I think that's a potential recipe for disaster between the old roommates.
Yeah, we haven't. Valentino's been awfully quiet this year, and probably part of it or most of it has to do with that 5-6 record. So
I know, amen. But hey, you know what? I think that's about all that I really got for the people. Anything else that you got for the people? Otherwise, we kind of sign off and let people enjoy their listen to the podcast here before we go watch some Michigan Ohio State football.
yes, I have a responsible amount on Ohio State. So go Buckeyes. Other than that, yeah, it's gonna be another good weekend of football. So I'm pretty hyped. Can't wait to talk to you next week. We'll see how some of these things shake out.
Amen to that. And with that, can't wait to talk to everybody next week. We should be back out and releasing the pod on more regular times with maybe some presenting sponsors. I mean, who knows? Slide into our DMs and let us know. And we can always be bought with as little or as much as you want to go. So let the bidding war begin. We have agents. I am Zach's agent. He is my agent. So talk to our agents and we can make something happen. But with that, we are officially signing off from the Week 12 Power Rankings. Good luck to everybody and let the chaos begin, baby.
Peace.